The night was a tapestry of darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. Emma, a 20-something-year-old artist, lived in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of a small town. The house, with its creaky floors and whispering walls, had a history that no one dared to speak of. Emma loved the solitude, finding inspiration in the eerie silence that enveloped her home. One fateful evening, as she sat sketching by the dim light of her desk lamp, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the basement. Her heart skipped a beat, but she brushed it off as the house settling. Hours passed, and the tapping grew louder, more insistent. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and adding to the cacophony of unsettling sounds. Emma's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, she descended the narrow staircase that led to the basement. The basement was a labyrinth of old furniture and forgotten memories. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, the tapping stopped. Emma swung the flashlight around, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She noticed an old, ornate mirror leaning against the far wall. The mirror, covered in a thick layer of grime, seemed to call out to her. Emma wiped away the dust, revealing her reflection. But as she stared into the mirror, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Behind her, just out of the flashlight's beam, stood a figure. It was a man, gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. Emma spun around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced, and she felt a chill crawl up her spine. The tapping resumed, louder and more urgent. She realized it was coming from behind the mirror. With trembling hands, she moved the mirror aside, revealing a hidden door. The door was old and wooden, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Against her better judgment, Emma opened the door. A cold draft hit her, and she found herself staring into a dark, narrow passage. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of her own breathing. She stepped into the passage, feeling the walls close in around her. As she ventured deeper, she heard faint whispers, unintelligible yet haunting. The passage led to a small, hidden room. In the center of the room stood an old, decrepit chair. On the chair sat a dusty, leather-bound journal. Emma picked it up and began to read. The journal belonged to the previous owner of the house, a man named Harold. He wrote about the house being haunted by a malevolent spirit that sought revenge. According to the journal, Harold had conducted a séance in an attempt to communicate with the spirit. Instead, he had unleashed something far more sinister. The final entry in the journal sent a shiver down Emma's spine. The spirit is growing stronger. It feeds on fear. I am its next victim. To anyone who reads this, leave the house before it's too late. Suddenly, Emma felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She screamed and dropped the journal, spinning around to face the figure from the mirror. The man reached out to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and malevolence. Emma fled the basement, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the top of the stairs, she heard the door slam shut behind her. She bolted out of the house, not stopping until she was far away. Emma moved into a small apartment in the town center, hoping to leave the horrors of that night behind. However, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every night, the tapping would return, now coming from the walls of her new home. She would hear faint whispers and see fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye. Desperate for answers, Emma reached out to a local historian named Mr. Thompson, who had a reputation for knowing the town's darkest secrets. He agreed to meet with her and discuss the history of the old Victorian house. Over a cup of tea in his cluttered study, Mr. Thompson revealed the chilling tale. The house had once belonged to a wealthy family, the Crowleys, who were known for their obsession with the occult. The head of the family, Jonathan Crowley, had been a powerful medium, conducting seances and rituals in an attempt to communicate with the other side. One night, during a particularly intense ritual, Jonathan had summoned a vengeful spirit, a malevolent entity that had been wronged in life. The spirit had taken over Jonathan's body, driving him to madness. He had slaughtered his entire family before taking his own life. The house had stood abandoned for decades until Harold moved in. Mr. Thompson explained that the spirit was bound to the house, but it could reach out to those who had encountered it, like Emma. Determined to end the nightmare, Emma and Mr. Thompson devised a plan to cleanse the house of the malevolent spirit. They gathered the necessary ingredients for a powerful banishing ritual and returned to the old Victorian house under the cover of darkness. As they entered the house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The walls seemed to whisper and groan, and the air was heavy with a palpable sense of dread. They made their way to the basement, where the hidden door still stood ajar. Mr. Thompson began the ritual, chanting ancient incantations, while Emma arranged the protective symbols and lit candles around the room. The temperature dropped, and a chilling wind swirled around them. The spirit's presence grew stronger, and the tapping intensified, echoing through the walls. Suddenly, the figure from the mirror appeared, its hollow eyes filled with rage. Emma and Mr. Thompson stood their ground, continuing the ritual despite the growing fear. The spirit lunged at them, but the protective symbols held it at bay. With one final powerful incantation, Mr. Thompson commanded the spirit to leave.